My name's Kristen, and I'm here to tell the story of how I survived and healed from childhood abuse, trauma, and neglect, and also domestic violence and drug addiction. I was born in Wilmington, North Carolina. My mother was drug addicted, and up until the age of 6, she struggled to take care of me, but I did live in the home. I can remember I had a 1-year-old sister when we were taken away when I was 6. And I can remember stacking things on top of things in front of the refrigerator to reach a box of cakes because that was the only thing I knew to feed my sister. I had to change her diapers. I had to feed her. I had to take care of this little baby. I remember the day that they came to take us away. It was nighttime. We were outside and the police pulled up and they took us away. My sister and I had different fathers. So she ended up getting adopted by her father's sister. I went to foster care for a little bit, and then at 7, I moved in with my biological father. I lived with my biological father from 7 to 10. Pretty quickly after I moved in, the sexual abuse began. At first, when I moved in with my father, it was so amazing because I had not had much of a relationship with him. He loved to fish and he would take me fishing. I love the beach. I love the ocean. I would get to swim. I would get to sleep out on piers at night. I would get to catch these great big fish, but it would get cold and I would be freezing and I'd be ready to go home. And I'd have to say, Dad, I'll do anything if you just take me home so I can get warm. And what that anything was sexual assault. He did not penetrate me at any point. He attempted many times, but I guess my body was just too small. When he couldn't penetrate me or he couldn't sexually assault me, he would physically assault me. He would beat the crap out of me. I can remember having a scar on my hip where I was hit with a belt that had holes in all the loops, and he beat me so hard with it, it ripped my hip open. He told me that the sexual assault was how you express love to someone. So I really believe that at my core. The abuse and the violence and the sexual trauma from him, I guess I just felt like, well, this is what a parent does. And when I was around 10 years old, someone came to my school and they talked about sexual abuse. And when I realized what was happening to me, I went and talked to school counselor. They immediately removed him, put him in jail. I had a stepmom at the time who was a very bad person. So she actually told me to call the cops and tell them that I had lied about everything. Shortly after that, I was taken out of her care, put into care with my grandparents. So my grandfather is the only family member that I've known my entire life. He's still in my life today. He has very bad skin cancer, and he's not going to be around much longer, but he's the only family I've ever known. But when I was younger, my grandmother chose to put me back in foster care. I was there maybe a few months at the age of 10. My first foster care, I was her first foster child. She became physically abusive with me, so I ended up in a different foster home that was actually also physically abusive. So around 13, I went into a group home, and I was in the group home till I was about 16, and that was the first place I was safe. When I was 16, I had not seen my mom since I was 6. She got better and came and got me out of the group home and brought me up to Statesville, North Carolina. And what I can say about that is a year and a half later, I was in the Concord Mills Mall at 17 years old, alone, with no one to take me home and nowhere to go because she went to use and disappeared. So my grandpa drove up to Charlotte and he brought me back to Wilmington around 17 years old. Sometimes it's hard to admit that I did turn into my mother in a lot of ways, that in spite of myself and in spite of my heart and who I wanted to be, I did not know how to function and become a better person. So around 17 and 18, I'll say the wrong people. I started using and just, I dropped out of high school. I started going down that path. So I ended up marrying a guy in the neighborhood because I was desperate to feel loved, desperate to have a family, just desperate to have someone stay. He wasn't a bad guy, but it just, we were too young and dumb. A couple years later, we separated. I ended up trying hard drugs for the first time, and my addiction began. My addiction began around 20, and for about a year, I say, I was just running wild, living in hotel rooms. When I was around 21, I met my son's father. He had adult entertainment industry business, and I went to work for him. And when I was 22, I got pregnant with my son. And at that point, I was very strung out. I actually met someone, an angel kind of came through my life. This person basically got me out of my situation, and I got clean. And I say clean, I had him. Me and his dad are just oil and water. We just never worked out. But when he was 18 months old, I had my first relapse. I tried to take care of him the best I could, but his father was very financially stable. He had his own businesses, and I just knew I wasn't what my son deserved at that time. There was a few years in his earlier childhood where I wasn't around because I knew that the version of me that I was worse for him. I went through recovery and relapse. I was a chronic relapser for about 12 years. I would get clean, I would try, I'd mess up again. I'm going to go back a little bit. When I was 12 years old, I started self-harming for the first time. And the euphoria and it just fixed everything, it fixed everything for me on a temporary basis. So my first addiction was self-harm. And through my teenage years, through my young adult years, suicidal thoughts, all these things played in my brain. I can remember as a kid convincing myself that my parents were aliens. There's no way that this is what parents do to their kids. They have to be aliens, and I tried to cope that way. I did get put into therapy immediately after my father's sexual abuse, but I did not realize through my addiction and things like that in my 20s how bad my mental health was. The point is that my mental health was always spiraling, and I get pregnant again when my son's 5 years old. My daughter's father was my second abuser. I was putting myself in positions to be abused because I did not know that I could have anything other than that. That was a violent relationship until I got pregnant. Got pregnant with my daughter. The abuse did stop, but I left him very shortly after we had her because I got clean again with her, and he could not get sober. So after I left him, she was like 6 months old, and he decided to go get sober for the first time. When he went to Raleigh to go get clean, he started having massive nosebleeds. They found a tumor. It was stage 4 inoperable. And he died within 2 months. I was in the hospital with him every day. My daughter, she was with us. We had a playpen in the hospital room. I didn't leave. But once he stopped being able to speak, we removed her. She stayed with some friends the last week or so. But losing him, her being so young, and me living the life I had lived, inevitably I ended up in a place where my mind was just gone. A year after he passed away, I got into another relationship because I used to be a love addict, a relationship addict. I had to be with someone. This guy was not abusive, but he was very young, and we were together for 4 years. We moved away. We moved to South Carolina. He was a dad to my daughter who had never, she'd lost her dad. 4 years later, that didn't work out. Part of that was because I could count 365 days at least. Every night I went to bed begging God to take my life, and every morning I woke up angry that he didn't for at least a year. 365 days I counted living that way, trying to take care of my daughter with someone who was very young and immature and had a video game addiction. And so my mental health at that point had spiraled to the point where I was on the edge. And I was begging for help. I was telling him, I want to die. I'm not okay like I am. But I didn't have anyone. I didn't have any help. I didn't have any support. And I had no one to take care of my daughter for me to get better. So after that relationship ended, me and my daughter had nowhere to go. We had some friends in Georgia that let us come stay there for a few months. But their situation wasn't something that we could come into on a permanent basis. So we ended up getting back to Wilmington because my son lived there still, and my mother off and on, through recovery, she was in Wilmington. Wilmington is a very hard town to live in. It's very gentrified. It's a beach town. It's a tourist town. You are either high income and Wilmington is your playground, or you're low income and you can't even get into a shelter to sleep. We have no shelters here. They just sold one of them. The second one has had COVID since last year. There's no homeless shelters. So I was literally about 3 months into my recovery. Let me start there. I got clean. My daughter went to foster care. I went to a mental health treatment facility. That was what I did different this time. I'd always gone to rehab, tried to get my drug addiction, and never treated my mental health. This time I said, you know what? I'm going to focus on my mental health. And I went in, and they put me in a dual unit. I signed myself in. I waited until they let me out 8 days later. And 8 days later, when I walked out of there, I was a person I never knew I could be. And I could look in the mirror and I could say, I love it. But through that process and through getting clean, I did that to get my daughter back out of foster care. So I went to the treatment place when I got out. I just had nowhere to go. I had friends let me crash on their couch, but I also have no friends and no support system because I'm not healthy enough yet to be able to build healthy relationships with people and trust that they're going to stay. I do therapy every other week. I work really hard on my issues because I don't want to deflect any of that onto my children. I want to make sure that I'm breaking those chains. But at the same time, I can admit that even today, I'm not there yet. So I have a very lonely life. My kids are everything. They're all that I have and they're all that I need. Going through the homelessness, I just didn't have many people to help me out. I had friends. I had one friend that let me and my daughter stay there for a few months. And I'll never forget Julie. She was my sunshine. That was right before I went and got the mental health help. And I was off my rocker. And she loved me, accepted me for who I was, and helped me go get help. So like I said, once I got out, I just had nowhere to go. So it was at the point that we were going to be sleeping in the car. And I knew that if I did not call DSS, somebody was going to. And I had the most incredible experience with DSS. From day one, they said to me, "Are you willing to do what we tell you to get your daughter back?" And I said, "Yes, anything you say." And I was always 2 steps ahead of them. I was already in mental health treatment stuff, and I did everything they asked. It took a year and a half. When I had about 3 months clean, I got into another relationship. Surprise! And he was just not a great guy. Surprise. So I had about 3 months clean. We were living in a tent behind the Home Depot. We did that for about 3 months in the middle of winter. I was in a tent for Christmas. And he was an addict too, and he just wasn't done. I will say that my daughter's father was the love of my life, but I will also say that this man was my soulmate. And one day we got a ride from a friend to go do something. He was going to keep going and go use, and I got out of the car. And I chose my life, and I chose myself again for the second time. I chose to live. Because if I was ever going to mess up, if I was ever going to go backwards, it would have been with him. I would have stayed in that car, and I would have lived my life the way I've always lived it. I can't do that to my children. They deserve better. I deserve better, and I can't change that. But they deserve better, and I will give them better. So through the homelessness and stuff, my social worker actually found my apartment that I'm in now. It's a little 2-bedroom apartment. It's on a church parking lot. It's a 2-year lease. My rent is very, very cheap. I work really, really hard. But we're finally here today. And I can remember a couple of years ago thinking like, okay, just stay clean one day at a time. If you stay clean, it'll get better. If you stay clean, it'll get better. And I just kept pushing. I just didn't use no matter what. And that didn't mean I didn't want to. And that didn't mean that I didn't do dumb stuff. And that didn't mean that I didn't have crazy thoughts. But no matter what, I just didn't pick it up. And that saved my life. And I would say this too. I chose after this last guy to be celibate and be single, which I had never done in my life. And I stayed celibate for like a year and a half. And I really believe that focusing on myself this time is what saved my life. Because every time I try to get clean, I get a boyfriend in recovery. You know, there's a pattern there with that. But I still have to constantly do mental health treatment. And in turn, that helps my recovery. I go to NA meetings and I do things for my recovery. But now that my mental health is being treated, the world is a place I've never seen before. And the decisions I'm able to make and the choices and the people that I do place in my life and the things I do for my children, they're all miracles. They're all miracles because this woman sitting here today, I never could have believed that she would be me, that I would become her. I want to say that no matter what you are going through, no matter what trauma, abuse, neglect, anything that you're going through, when you feel like there's a rock on top of you, you can't breathe anymore, and it's so bad that it's not going to get any better, if you get through that moment, that worst moment, then at the end of it, the sun comes out and it shines so bright, and there are miracles and there's joy and there's love, but it takes work. It takes so much work. And I have not arrived. I'm not there. I will always have work to do. It still takes work today for me to give my kids the life that they have and be the woman that I am. But I'm willing to keep doing the work for as long as it takes to be a healthy, happy person and to have healthy, happy children. My children, I've gotten them in therapy. My son has had some neglect from me, and I have to fix that. I call it my second millionth chance. Because I've had so many second chances. I've had times where so many people have tried, that strangers have tried to reach out and help, and my mental health just would not allow me to help myself, to let anyone help me. I was incapable of staying clean, of anything positive. When I chose to love myself, when I chose to open my mind, take suggestions, do what people told me was best for me instead of what I thought, and really listen, I got better. I started getting better, and every day I wake up, I'm better than I was yesterday. Every day I wake up, I'm a better mom than I was yesterday. I have to break these generational curses. I have to shatter these ceilings. I have to raise children who are going to shatter ceilings. because they are. I have the most incredible children in the world. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't be here today. I am so blessed I got a second chance because my son's almost 13. And if I would continue the path that I was on, I could lose that relationship with him forever. But I feel like I'm right on time. I'm right there at that margin where if I kept on any more of my BS, I would lose that. But I had a chance to fix it with him. And our relationship today is beautiful. Not only did I get my daughter back out of foster care, but my son, who has never lived with me since he was like 1.5, is living in our home now. It's hard. I don't have a car. I don't have a car in a town where it's just crazy. My short-term goal is to get a vehicle. My long-term goal is to buy a home. I want my children to have a home where they can come and open that door and go to at any point in their life. When I'm gone, somewhere they can go that they have. I've never known what it's like to open a door and say I'm home until I was 35 years old. And I want my children to always have their home. We're going to get there. We're going to get there.